The sound of his own rib cracking was louder than the howling wind. Wren hit the frozen asphalt hard, the taste of copper and road salt filling his mouth. Before he could scramble up, a boot, expensive Italian leather, utterly unsuited for a Colorado winter, slammed into his shoulder, pinning him to the ice. "Stay down, trash," a security guard grunted. He was built like a linebacker, wearing a tactical vest that looked ridiculous against the backdrop of a quaint ski town. "Wren!" Mira screamed. Her voice was thin, brittle, like dry twigs snapping. She was 17, but looked 12 in that moment, shivering in a threadbare denim jacket that offered zero protection against the sub-zero drop. Wren grit his teeth, forcing his head up. Standing on the heated mahogany porch of The Summit, the town's newest, most grotesque luxury resort, was Silas Vane. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch, the amber liquid catching the light of the patio heaters. He looked warm, disgustingly, arrogantly warm. "I told you last week," Vane said, his voice smooth and bored, projecting effortlessly over the rising gale. "This isn't a charity ward, it's a 5-star experience. And having 2 squatters living in the maintenance shed ruins the aesthetic for my investors." "That shed was on our land!" Wren shouted, the cold air burning his lungs. "You forged the deed! You bribed the county clerk!" Vane took a slow sip of his scotch. "I improved the neighborhood, kid. I bought the debt. I own the mountain. And right now, you're trespassing." He flicked his free hand dismissively at the guards. "Toss them past the property line. If they come back, aim for the knees." The guards dragged them to the edge of the resort's heated driveway and shoved them into the deep snow of the public road. Behind them, the massive glass walls of the summit glowed like a spaceship, filled with laughing socialites and the golden warmth of electric fireplaces. Ahead of them, the world was ending. The sky wasn't gray. It was a bruised, suffocating purple. The wind wasn't just blowing, it was screaming, a high-pitched shriek that signaled the arrival of a white death, the kind of blizzard the old-timers in the Rockies prayed they'd never see again. The town's tornado sirens began to wail, a mournful drone echoing off the canyon walls. "Wren, I can't feel my toes," Mira whispered, her teeth chattering violently. Her lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. Wren looked down the valley toward the town. Doors were bolting shut. Blinds were drawn. The locals knew Vane owned the sheriff, the bank, and the mayor. No one was going to open a door for the pariahs who dared to sue the town's savior. They were on their own. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize Wren's chest. But then a memory sparked. It was warm, smelling of cedar smoke and pipe tobacco. 10 years ago, Wren was 8. His father, a man with hands like sandpaper and a heart like a furnace, sat in his rocking chair, while a similar storm rattled the windows of their old cabin. He had pulled Wren close, pointing a calloused finger toward the jagged silhouette of the North Ridge. "You see that twisted oak, Wren? The one that looks like it was struck by lightning but refused to die?" "Yeah, Dad, the ugly one," Wren had chirped. His father had laughed, a deep, rumbling sound. "Ugly things survive, son. Pretty things break. Now listen to me. That tree marks the spot. My grandfather worked the mines during the Cold War. They built things to last back then. Not for comfort, but for life." His father had leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, a secret just for the men of the house. "Under the roots of that burnt oak, there's a hatch. It's painted lead gray, buried under 6 inches of topsoil. It ain't just a hole, Wren. It's a heart. A geothermal survey station. It taps into the volcanic veins deep under this mountain. It breathes heat. If the world ever freezes over, if the lights go out and the wolves come knocking, You take your sister and you go to the oak. You understand? The earth never forgets how to keep you warm. The memory faded, replaced by the biting reality of the wind. Wren looked up. The north ridge was barely visible through the curtain of driving snow, a terrifying climb into the black maw of the storm. Wren, we have to go to the police station, Mira stammered, stumbling. No, Wren said, grabbing her shoulders. He looked into her eyes, channeling every ounce of his father's stubborn grit. Vane owns the cops. We'll freeze in a holding cell. We're going up. Up? Mira looked at the ridge in horror. We'll die, Wren. Trust me, Wren roared over the wind. He grabbed her hand, his grip crushing. Dad left us a way out. The climb was a nightmare. The snow was already knee-deep, heavy and wet. Every step was a battle against gravity and hypothermia. The wind lashed their faces, turning tears into ice instantly. Behind them, the lights of the town flickered and died, the power grid failing under the weight of the ice. The summit went dark, too, save for the faint glow of emergency lights. But Wren kept moving. He was a machine, fueled by desperation. He dragged Mira when she fell, carried her when she couldn't walk. Finally, a shadow emerged from the white void. The burnt oak. It stood like a skeletal hand clawing at the sky, black and defiant. Wren dropped Mira in the lee of the trunk. Dig! He yelled, falling to his knees. His hands were numb blocks of meat, but he clawed at the frozen earth between the massive roots. He tore his fingernails. He didn't care. Please be real. Please don't be just a bedtime story. His fingers hit something hard, not stone, metal. Wren frantically wiped away the dirt. A heavy industrial steel wheel handle was revealed. Recessed into a flat iron plate, it looked like the hatch of a submarine. Mira, help me. Together they grabbed the freezing wheel. Wren grunted, putting his back into it, screaming with the effort. Lefty Lucy, come on, groan. The ancient hinges shrieked, a sound of protest from a machine that hadn't been woken in 50 years. But the seal broke. A hiss of air escaped. Wren heaved the heavy lid open. Immediately, it wasn't the smell of stale air that hit them. It was warmth. A dry, consistent, blessed warmth rising from the darkness below. Get in, Wren gasped, lowering Mira into the abyss. He followed her, grabbing the internal handle. As he pulled the heavy steel hatch shut above his head, the screaming wind was silenced instantly. The lock engaged with a reassuring, heavy thud. They were in total darkness, but the air around them was 70 degrees. Wren fumbled in his pocket for his lighter. The flame flickered to life, illuminating their sanctuary. It wasn't a cave. It was a bunker lined with riveted steel and concrete, and in the center, dominating the small space, was a massive cast iron pipe system, radiating heat like a silent, sleeping dragon. Wren slumped against the wall, sliding down to the floor, laughing and sobbing at the same time. His father hadn't lied. While Silas Vane shivered in his glass castle, Wren and Mira were sitting in the heated heart of the mountain. But as Wren looked at the gauges on the wall, he saw something else. A schematic map of the town below, with blue lines running from this very room to every house in the valley. This wasn't just a shelter, it was the control room. The silence inside the bunker was heavy, a sharp contrast to the banshee scream of the blizzard raging just 6 feet above their heads. It smelled of stale ozone, old paper, and the faint metallic tang of dried oil, the scent of a time capsule cracked open for the first time in decades. Wren held the lighter high, the small flame casting dancing, nervous shadows against the curved concrete walls. Don't move yet, Wren murmured, his voice raspy. Dad had a rule about entering dark spaces. Mira, still shivering violently against the cold steel of the ladder, nodded. Her teeth chattered, a rhythmic, hollow sound in the quiet. Check. Check for gas. Check for snakes. Check for structural failure. Wren smiled grimly. She remembered. 8 years ago, a humid July evening in the backyard. Their father, Jack, had been teaching them how to fix the transmission on his beat-up Ford F-150. He had wiped grease onto a shop rag, looked them dead in the eye, and said, "Panic is the first thing that kills you, kiddos. Cold kills you second. But stupidity? Stupidity kills you fastest. When you walk into a place that's been sleeping, you wake it up gentle. You don't kick the door down." Wren moved the lighter slowly toward a sconce on the wall, a glass hurricane lamp. He prayed there was still fuel. He turned the brass knob, raising the wick, and touched the flame to it. For a second, nothing, then a sputter, and finally, a warm, golden bloom of light. The kerosene was old, but it burned. As the light pushed back the gloom, the bunker revealed itself. It wasn't just a hole in the ground. It was a testament to a father's paranoia. Or perhaps his prophecy. Metal shelving units lined the far wall, bolted to the concrete, stocked with military-grade MREs, jars of pickled vegetables that looked gray with age, and wool blankets sealed in heavy-duty vacuum bags. But the centerpiece was the machine. It was a tangled mass of copper pipes and iron valves, bolted to the floor like the engine of a steamship. It hummed with a low vibrational frequency that Wren could feel in the soles of his boots. It looked like something out of the Industrial Revolution, rugged, over-engineered, and built to outlast God. "The dragon," Wren whispered. Mira stepped away from the ladder, her eyes wide. I thought that was just a story." Flashback, the living room lit only by the fireplace, smelling of pine needles. Jack was sketching on a napkin. "The mountain is alive, Wren. Deep down under the granite, there's heat. Magma veins. Most people think you need electricity to survive. They're wrong. You need heat. I tapped a vein back in '98, built a heat exchanger. It's a dragon, Wren. It breathes hot water. As long as the mountain stands, that room stays 70 degrees. It's real," Mira said, her voice stabilizing as the ambient warmth began to penetrate her frozen denim jacket. She walked over to a heavy wooden footlocker at the base of a cot. Wren moved to the machine. He was a mechanic. Machinery was his language. He touched a copper pipe. It was hot, almost scalding. He squinted at the analog pressure gauge. The needle was hovering near the red zone, vibrating anxiously. "If the needle dances, she's choking," his father's voice echoed in his head. "You gotta bleed the pressure, or she'll blow a gasket. You gotta listen to what she's asking for." Wren scanned the manifold. There it was, a manual relief valve, caked in grime. "Mira, cover your ears," Wren warned. He gripped the wheel. It was cold iron, stubborn. He gritted his teeth, channeling every ounce of frustration from the eviction, the beating, and the cold into his hands. With a guttural grunt, he twisted. Screech. A jet of white steam hissed out of the vent, loud and angry. The pressure gauge needle dropped instantly, settling into the green optimal zone. The aggressive humming softened into a steady, rhythmic throb. The dragon was purring. "Good girl," Wren muttered, patting the hot metal. Behind him he heard a latch click. Mira had opened the wooden chest. "Wren," she called out softly. "Look." He turned. Mira was holding up a can of peaches. Not a store-bought can, but a mason jar, hand-labeled in masking tape. Summer harvest for a rainy day. Inside the chest were supplies not for soldiers, but for a family. A deck of bicycle playing cards, a first aid kit, a wind-up radio, and a thick, leather-bound logbook. Wren walked over and took the logbook. His hands were shaking, not from cold anymore, but from the sudden, overwhelming presence of the man who wasn't there. He opened it to the first page. His father's handwriting was jagged, hurried. Entry 1. If you're reading this, the grid failed. Or the banks took the house. I built this place because the world is fragile, kids. Vane and his lot, they build glass towers on fault lines. They think money is a shield. But when the sky falls, money is just paper. This place, this is iron. This is blood. Wren swallowed a lump in his throat. He looked at Mira. She had wrapped herself in one of the wool blankets and was struggling to open the jar of peaches. Here, Wren said, taking the jar. He popped the seal with the edge of his pocket knife. The smell of sweet syrup filled the stale air, a scent of summer in the middle of a frozen hell. They sat on the floor, leaning against the warm pipes of the geothermal exchanger, passing the jar back and forth. They ate with their fingers, sticky and starving. The sugar hit their bloodstreams like a drug. He knew, Mira said, wiping syrup from her chin. He knew Vane would come for us eventually. He knew men like Vane always come, Wren corrected. He used to say, wolves don't hunt because they're mean, Wren. They hunt because they're hungry. But a bear defends its cave. Wren stood up and walked back to the machine. The warmth was saving their lives, but his mechanic's brain wouldn't rest. He traced the pipes leaving the exchanger. They didn't just loop back into the ground. There was a secondary manifold, a series of larger pipes painted bright yellow, disappearing into the concrete wall, heading down toward the valley. He wiped the dust off a brass plaque riveted to the wall above the yellow pipes. Municipal Auxiliary Line, Sector 4. Status, disengaged. Wren's heart hammered against his ribs. Sector 4. That was the code for the old downtown district. The workers' housing, the place where the waitress, the mechanic, and the teacher lived. The people who had locked their doors when Wren and Mira walked by earlier. Flashback. A hiking trip. They were standing on this very hill looking down at the town. You see those chimneys, Wren? Dad pointed to the small, smoking stacks of the village. Those folks are good people mostly, but they're dependent. They rely on the power plant 3 counties over. If that line cuts, they freeze. Why don't they use your machine, Dad? Because people are scared of what they don't understand. And the mayor? He signed a contract with the electric company. Illegal to use unauthorized geothermal. But I plumbed it anyway, just in case. Wren stared at the massive wheel valve controlling the yellow line. It was locked with a heavy chain and a padlock. Mira, Wren said, his voice tight, come look at this. Mira joined him, the blanket trailing behind her like a royal cape. She squinted at the plaque, then at the schematic map on the wall. Her eyes darted back and forth, connecting the dots faster than Wren could explain. Sector 4 is the village, she whispered. This isn't just a heater for the bunker. It's a substation. Dad plumbed the whole town, Wren realized. He tapped the magma vein not just for us. He built a central heating heart for the whole damn valley. Above them the wind howled louder, a muffled roar through the feet of earth. Wren imagined the scene outside, the power lines snapping under the weight of the ice, the summit's glass walls frosting over, the wooden shacks of the village turning into ice boxes. They're freezing down there, Mira said. She wasn't looking at Wren, she was looking at the chain. The ones who shut the door on us. Wren looked at the heavy iron wheel. He could feel the heat radiating off the blocked pipe. It was immense, enough energy to boil water in every radiator from Main Street to the church. We're safe here, Wren said, testing her. We have food, we have heat. We could wait out the storm. By morning, Half the town might be hypothermic. Vane's resort will definitely be a popsicle. Mira looked at the jar of peaches, then at the logbook, and finally at Wren. Her expression hardened. It was the same look their father had when he stood his ground against the bank auditors. "Dad didn't build this for cowards, Wren," she said, "and he didn't raise us to be vain." Wren grinned. It was a sharp, dangerous grin. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his multi-tool. "No," he agreed, "he raised us to be mechanics." Wren knelt before the chain. He didn't have the key, but he had a bolt cutter on his belt, and he had a memory of his father saying, "Rules are for people who can't think. Physics is for people who can." "Hold the light, Mira," Wren commanded. "I'm going to need both hands. We're about to wake up the whole mountain." He clamped the jaws of the cutter onto the chain. The metal groaned. Outside, the storm was trying to bury them. But inside, under the roots of the burnt oak, 2 forgotten orphans were about to turn the heat back on. The bolt cutter snapped through the rusted chain with a sound like a pistol crack, sharp and definitive in the concrete echo chamber. The heavy steel links rattled to the floor, a pile of dead snakes. "All right," Wren breathed, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. The bunker was getting hot, too hot. The dragon was awake, and like any beast woken from a 30-year hibernation, it was cranky. "Here we go." He gripped the cold iron of the sector valve wheel with both hands. He planted his boots, gritted his teeth, and heaved. "Open, you stubborn son of a—" It didn't budge. It wasn't just stiff. It was seized. Wren threw his shoulder into it, grunting with exertion. Nothing. The metal felt dead, immovable, welded by time and pressure. "Wren, look at the gauge!" Mira shouted, her voice cutting through the hum of the machinery. She was pointing to the main pressure dial on the central boiler. Wren spun around. The needle wasn't hovering in the green optimal zone anymore. It was trembling violently, climbing past the yellow warning track and creeping toward the jagged red line marked critical. The pipes around them began to groan, a deep, resonant shudder that vibrated through the floorboards and into Wren's teeth. A jet of steam hissed angrily from a seal near the ceiling, white and hot. "It's vapor-locked," Wren realized, his stomach dropping like a stone. "The system is trying to push heat down to the town, but there's no displacement. The main exhaust vent up top. It must be buried under the snow." He let go of the wheel, his hands shaking. Flashback, a winter morning in the garage, the smell of sawdust, coffee, and Gojo hand cleaner. Jack was wrestling with an old boiler he'd salvaged from a scrapyard. He tapped the pressure relief valve with a wrench, looking at a 10-year-old Wren. "Wren, listen to me. Pressure is just energy with nowhere to go. It's like a frightened animal in a corner. If you don't give it a door, it'll make its own door, usually through the wall. If this needle hits red, you don't force the intake. You gotta clear the chimney. Always clear the chimney first." "The external vent," Wren said, his voice hollow, as he looked up at the heavy steel hatch they had just sealed. "I have to clear the ice off the tower, or this whole bunker turns into a bomb." Mira grabbed his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into his sleeve. "You can't go back out there. Wren, listen to the wind. The wind chill is 40 below zero. That's not weather, that's a death sentence." Wren looked at the schematic on the wall. The exhaust tower was located 50 yards north of the hatch, completely exposed to the full fury of the ridge. 50 yards might as well have been 50 miles in a whiteout. "If I don't," Wren said, his voice steady despite the fear coiling in his gut, "the pressure builds. The pipes burst. We cook in here like lobsters in a pot, and the people down in the valley freeze to death. Dad didn't build this to be a tomb, Mira. Mira looked at the red needle. It ticked upward. Tick, tick. It was a countdown. She didn't argue. She looked at him, her eyes hardening with the same steel that ran through their father's veins. She let go of his arm and moved to the supply chest. "Then we do it Dad's way," she said, her voice commanding. "Layer up, no exposed skin. Grease the seals." Memory. The blizzard drill. It was a game Jack used to play with them before winter hikes. He'd time them putting on their gear. "Cotton kills," he would chant like a drill sergeant. "Wool saves. And grease is your best friend." They moved with the frantic efficiency of a pit crew. Ren stripped off his wet jacket. Mira handed him a thick, scratchy wool sweater from a vacuum-sealed bag. Then another. Then a heavy canvas work coat lined with sheepskin. It smelled of mothballs and safety. Ren sat down on the cot and Mira grabbed a tub of automotive grease, thick, viscous, and smelling of petroleum. "Close your eyes," she commanded. She scooped out a glob and smeared the grease over his cheeks, his nose, his forehead, anywhere the wind could bite. It was an old mountaineer's trick their father swore by. "The wind wants to steal your heat," Jack used to say. "Make yourself slippery. Don't let it get a grip." Ren pulled on 2 pairs of wool socks, then jammed his feet into his boots. He wrapped duct tape around the cuffs of his pants and the wrists of his gloves, creating an airtight seal. No gaps, no weakness. He picked up the heavy iron crowbar from the tool rack. It felt heavy in his hand. It felt like a weapon. "Tie off," Mira said, handing him a coil of yellow nylon rope. She clipped one end to a structural I-beam near the ladder and the other to Ren's belt with a heavy-duty carabiner. "3 tugs means you're stuck," Mira said, checking the knot. "Constant pulling means come back now." Ren looked at his sister. In the flickering orange light of the hurricane lamp, she looked like a warrior. She wasn't the little sister he had to protect anymore. She was his anchor. "If the line goes slack," Ren started, the dark thought slipping out. "Just clear the vent," Mira interrupted, her voice fierce, refusing to let him finish that sentence. "I'll have the hot cocoa ready when you get back." Ren nodded. He climbed the ladder, the rungs cold even through his gloves. He took a deep breath, held it in his lungs, and reached for the hatch wheel. Tick, tick. The gauge below was screaming for release. Ren spun the wheel. Clang! The hatch flew open, ripped from his hand by the wind, as if a giant, invisible hand had yanked it. It wasn't a storm anymore. It was a physical assault. The noise was deafening. A chaotic, screaming roar that drowned out his own thoughts. The cold hit him like a physical blow, a sledgehammer of ice trying to drive him back into the hole. Ren didn't stand up. He knew better. If he stood, the wind would toss him off the ridge like a rag doll. He stayed low, belly to the snow, digging his elbows into the ice. He looked back one last time. Mira was looking up at him from the bottom of the ladder, holding the rope. Ren pulled his goggles down, gripped the crowbar, and crawled out into the white void. The hatch slammed shut behind him, or maybe the wind just swallowed the sound, and Ren was alone with the mountain. The clock was ticking. The dragon was waiting to breathe, and Ren had 50 yards of hell to cross. The world had vanished. Ren was no longer on a mountain in Colorado. He was inside the throat of a monster. The moment the hatch slammed shut behind him, or maybe the wind just swallowed the sound, deleting it from existence, gravity seemed to shift. The wind wasn't just moving air, it was a physical wall, a solid, relentless force pushing him toward the cliff edge, screaming at a pitch that vibrated in his molars. He dug his elbows into the snow, clawing at the frozen crust. He was blind. His goggles had frosted over within seconds, rendering them useless. He ripped them off, and the ice crystals hit his exposed eyes like buckshot, forcing them into a squint. Left hand, right hand, drag, breathe. It wasn't walking. It was swimming upstream in a river of concrete. The 50 yards to the exhaust tower felt like 50 miles. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, beating a rhythm of pure, unadulterated panic. The cold found the seams in his armor instantly. It bit through the wool, through the canvas, seeking the heat of his blood with a predatory hunger. Tug. The yellow nylon rope at his waist jerked tight. Ren paused, burying his face in the snow to escape the wind for a split second. The rope. Mira, down in the bunker. She was holding the other end. She was the anchor. If he slid off the ridge, she was the only thing keeping him from a 2,000-foot drop into the void. He imagined her small hands gripping the line, her eyes glued to the pressure gauge that was slowly ticking toward a boiler explosion. Pain is just information, Ren. His father's voice. It wasn't a memory this time. It was a hallucination, whispering clearly in his ear, cutting through the cacophonous roar of the blizzard. Your fingers hurt? That means they still work. Your lungs burn? That means you're breathing. Ignore the noise. Focus on the job. One foot in front of the other. Do the work. Ren grit his teeth so hard his jaw ached. Do the work! He snarled into the ice. He crawled. He bumped into something hard. Metal. He fumbled upward, his hands numb, feeling the rivets. The tower. He dragged himself up, wrapping his legs around the base of the steel chimney like a wrestler pinning an opponent. He wiped his eyes and looked up. It was worse than he thought. The vents at the top of the 12-foot stack weren't just covered in snow. They were encased in a tomb of glaze ice, thick, translucent, and hard as granite. It was an impenetrable shell, formed by the freezing rain that had preceded the snow. The dragon below was trying to exhale, but its throat was swollen shut. Ren tried to stand, but a gust of wind, easily 70 miles per hour, slammed him back against the metal. He couldn't get the leverage. He was too small, too weak, too frozen. I can't do it. It's too thick. The thought was seductive. It came with a desire to just lie down in the snow, to close his eyes and let the sleep take him. Hypothermia was whispering to him, promising that the cold wouldn't hurt if he just stopped fighting. Then he thought of Silas Vane. He pictured Vane in his penthouse, probably wrapped in a down comforter, complaining that the room service was late. Vane who thought the world belonged to him because he signed a check. Vane who looked at Ren and saw garbage. Ren's blood didn't freeze, it boiled. Not today. He hooked his leg through a support strut. He grabbed the heavy iron crowbar with both hands. He screamed, a primal, ferocious sound that was lost to the storm, and swung. Clang. The bar bounced off the ice, sending a shockwave of pain up his arms and into his shoulders. The ice chipped, a tiny white scar on a glass shield. Again. Clang. Ren slipped, his boot skidding on the metal. He dangled for a second, the wind tearing at him, before hauling himself back up. Again. Smash. He wasn't fighting the ice anymore. He was fighting the eviction. He was fighting the shame of begging for food. He was fighting for Mira, for his dad, for every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough. He found a rhythm in the violence. Swing, impact, scream, swing, impact, scream. A crack appeared. A spiderweb of fractures running through the glaze. Ren's vision was tunneling. Black spots danced at the edges of his sight. He had one, maybe two good swings left in him before his muscles failed completely. He looked at the center of the blockage. Open up! Ren roared. He put his entire body weight behind the swing. A desperate Hail Mary pass into the dark. He drove the pointed end of the crowbar straight into the fracture. Crack! The sound was like a gunshot. The ice shattered, exploding outward in a shower of jagged diamonds. Whoosh! The reaction was instantaneous. A blast of superheated steam erupted from the vent with the force of a jet engine taking off. The shock wave knocked Ren backward, throwing him off the tower and into the deep snow. The steam didn't dissipate. It roared into the blizzard, a defiant vertical column of pure heat, rising against the cold. It was a white flag of war, declared against the winter. Ren lay on his back, staring up. The heat from the vent was so intense it melted the snow on his face. Instantly. Through the hole, the steam punched in the storm clouds. For one brief, miraculous second, he saw a star. The ground beneath him shuddered. The angry vibration was gone. The dragon was breathing. Tug, tug, tug. The rope at his waist jerked 3 times, firm and insistent. Mira. Ren grabbed the rope. He didn't have the strength to stand, so he let her pull him. He crawled back along the lifeline, a battered soldier returning from the front. He reached the hatch. It popped open, and warmth, glorious, smelling of kerosene and old dust, spilled out. He tumbled down the ladder, landing in a heap on the concrete floor. Mira was there instantly. She slammed the hatch shut, spinning the locking wheel until it clicked, sealing out the scream of the wind. Silence returned. Ren lay on the floor, gasping for air, his chest heaving. His hands were frozen into claws. His face felt like it was burning as the blood rushed back into the capillaries. Mira rolled him over. She was crying, tears making tracks through the dust on her face. She began stripping the frozen, ice-caked gloves off his hands. "The gauge!" Ren wheezed, his voice a broken whisper. "Check the gauge." Mira looked up at the boiler. The needle had plummeted from the red zone. It was sitting dead center in the green. The terrifying groaning of the pipes had been replaced by a steady, rhythmic throb. Thump, hiss, thump, hiss. It sounded like a heartbeat. "It's green," Mira sobbed, laughing and crying at the same time. "It's perfect." "You did it, Ren." Ren closed his eyes, a wave of exhaustion crashing over him so heavy it felt like drowning. "We're okay? We're okay," Mira whispered, pulling his head into her lap and wrapping a warm wool blanket around his shoulders. Ren struggled to sit up. He wasn't done. He looked at the yellow pipes on the wall, the Sector 4 auxiliary line, the wheel they couldn't turn before. "Help me up," Ren said. "Ren, rest." "No," he said, grabbing the cot for support. "The chimney is clear. The pressure is holding. Now we turn the lights back on." They walked to the massive iron wheel together. Ren placed his raw, trembling hands on the rim. Mira placed hers next to his. "Together?" Ren asked. "Together," Mira answered. They pushed. This time, the wheel didn't fight. The vapor lock was gone. The valve spun smoothly, the gears meshing with a heavy, satisfying clunk, clunk, clunk. A deep, rushing sound filled the room, the sound of water moving at high velocity. The yellow pipes began to vibrate, singing a low note. Ren placed his hand on the pipe leading out to the buried town. 10 seconds. Cold. 20 seconds. Cool. 30 seconds. Warmth. It started faint, then grew intense. The heat of the earth, harvested by their father's genius and liberated by their courage, was rushing down the mountain at 60 miles per hour. Ren looked at the map on the wall. He traced the blue line down to the cluster of squares marked Town Square. He imagined the scene below, under the floorboards of the frozen cottages, inside the radiators of the old town hall. The dormant pipes were waking up. The ice was melting. "Dad," Ren whispered, looking at the ceiling, tears finally spilling over his greased cheeks. "We did it." Mira slumped against him, exhausted. "Do you think they'll know?" The people in the town? Do you think they'll know we saved them? Wren pulled the blanket tighter around both of them, sinking down to the floor next to the humming machine. The adrenaline was fading, leaving him hollow but peaceful. They might not know who, Wren said softly, but they'll know someone didn't forget them. Outside, the storm raged on, burying the world in white, but inside the bunker it was a fortress of summer. And miles below, in the dark, frozen valley, the first radiator began to hiss. The wind outside didn't just howl, it mourned. It was a low, guttural moan that vibrated against the heavy steel hatch, a reminder of the white hell that was still raging just 6 feet above their heads. But down in the bunker, the world was orange light and the smell of instant cocoa. Wren sat on the floor, his back pressed against the warm concrete wall, wrapped in 3 wool blankets. His hands, still red and raw from the climb, were curled around a steaming tin mug. The heat from the metal cup seeped into his palms, stinging a little. But it was a good sting. It was the sting of life. "Drink," Mira said softly, sitting cross-legged opposite him. She had found a packet of Swiss Miss in the supply chest. 10 years expired, but sugar and cocoa don't know time. Wren took a sip. It was watery and tasted faintly of old tin, but it was the best thing he had ever tasted. "How long?" Wren asked, his voice rasping. The scream on the tower had shredded his vocal cords. Mira checked the wind-up clock on the wall. 3 a.m. The storm is peaking. If we were up there... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Wren looked at the machine in the center of the room. The dragon was no longer just a piece of hardware. It was a living member of their family. The needle on the pressure gauge held steady in the green, unwavering. The yellow pipes leading into the wall, the Sector 4 line, were humming with a deep, resonant vibration. It was a lullaby of high-velocity hot water rushing down into the dark. "I wonder if they feel it yet," Wren whispered. 2 miles away and 2,000 feet up. The feeling was very different. Silas Vane was freezing to death in a $5,000 Italian suit. The penthouse of the Summit was designed to be a triumph of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling glass, open-concept living, minimal barriers between the guest and nature. Now nature was breaking in. The power had failed at midnight. Vane had stood by the panoramic window, watching the lights of his resort flicker and die as the main transformer blew under the weight of the ice. He had waited for the backup generators to kick in. They were top-of-the-line diesel units capable of powering a small hospital. They sputtered, they coughed, and then silence. The diesel fuel lines, exposed to the elements because an aesthetic architect didn't want ugly pipes ruining the landscaping, had gelled. The fuel had turned into useless sludge in the negative 40-degree drop. Now, 3 hours later, the temperature inside the penthouse was dropping past freezing. Vane sat huddled on his imported leather sofa, wrapped in a mink throw he had ripped off the wall decoration. His teeth chattered so hard his jaw ached. He pulled out his phone. Dead. No signal. The storm had shredded the cell towers. He looked around the room. It was filled with wealth. A Steinway piano, a Jackson Pollock painting, a sculpture made of rare driftwood. None of it generated heat. "This is ridiculous," Vane stammered to the empty room. "I am Silas Vane. I don't freeze." But the cold didn't care about his bank account. The cold was a repo man, and it was here to collect. Desperation, sharp and jagged, pierced his arrogance. He needed fire. The resort had electric fireplaces, useless glass screens now. He looked at the antique library in the corner. Books, paper. Vane scrambled up, tripping over his numb feet. He grabbed a first edition Hemingway from the shelf. He didn't hesitate. He tore the pages out, piling them into a decorative brass bowl on the coffee table. He fumbled for his gold lighter. The flame flared. He fed the paper. It burned bright and fast, offering a fleeting moment of warmth. More, he gasped. He grabbed a chair, a mid-century modern piece made of teak. He smashed it against the floor, breaking the legs. He threw the wood onto the small fire. Smoke filled the luxury suite, choking him, but he crawled closer to the flame, hugging his knees. The great Silas Vane, the titan of industry, was reduced to a caveman, burning his furniture to survive the night. He looked out the frosted glass. Down in the valley, through a break in the swirling snow, he thought he saw something. A faint glow. The town. Why? Vane whispered, his lips blue. Why do they have lights? It wasn't lights. It was something else. But his brain was too sluggish to process it. He just knew that down there, in the shacks he wanted to bulldoze, people were alive. And up here, in his castle, the king was turning into ice. Sheriff Miller sat at his kitchen table in the dark, his service pistol sitting next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey. He was wearing his parka inside the house. His wife and daughter were huddled together under a mountain of quilts in the bedroom. Miller could see his breath in the air. The power had been out for 6 hours. The propane tank outside was frozen shut. He was watching the thermometer on the wall, 35 degrees, 34 degrees. If it hits 30, Miller muttered to himself, we move to the basement. He took a sip of whiskey. It burned, but it was a fake heat. He knew the reality. The White Death didn't leave survivors. By morning, half the town, the elderly, the sick, would be gone. He had failed them. He had let Vane run this town, and now Vane's grid had failed them. Clank. Miller jumped. The sound came from the corner of the kitchen. Clank hiss. He frowned. He stood up, flashlight in hand, and walked toward the old cast-iron radiator under the window. It was a relic, a dust collector that hadn't been used since the town switched to the electric grid in the 90s. Miller shone the light on it. The metal was ticking, expanding. He reached out a hand, hesitating. He touched the iron fins. He snatched his hand back. Hot, he whispered. He touched it again. It wasn't just lukewarm, it was hot. Radiating, blistering heat. Martha! Miller yelled, forgetting the time. Martha, get up! His wife ran into the room, wrapped in a duvet. What, is it the roof? Did the roof collapse? Miller pointed at the radiator. Feel it. She touched it and gasped. How? The power is out. The gas is off. Miller put his ear to the pipes. He could hear it, the rushing sound of water. Fast, pressurized water moving through the veins of the house. He ran to the window and wiped away the frost. He looked across the street at the baker's house. He saw the baker standing in his own window, looking back, holding a candle, a look of bewildered salvation on his face. Then he looked up, toward the north ridge, toward the burnt oak, through the swirling snow. He couldn't see the bunker, but he could see the steam. A faint, white column rising against the black sky, defying the storm. Miller remembered the rumors. He remembered Jack, the crazy mechanic who used to rant about magma veins and earth blood at the bar. He remembered how the town laughed at him. He remembered how they had turned their backs on Jack's kids just yesterday. Miller sank into a chair, the radiant heat washing over him, melting the frost on his parka. He covered his face with his hands. It's not Vane, Miller choked out, his voice thick with shame. It's the kids, the mechanics' kids. Ren and Mira? His wife asked, confused. But we kicked them out. Yeah, Miller said, looking at the glowing warmth of the radiator that was saving his daughter's life. We kicked them out, and they just turned the heat back on. Back in the bunker, Ren was falling asleep. The adrenaline crash was hitting him hard. His head nodded onto Mira's shoulder. Ren, Mira whispered. Yeah, do you think Dad is watching? Ren listened to the hum of the dragon. He listened to the wind dying down outside. I don't think he's watching, Ren mumbled, his eyes closing. I think he's working. We're just the hands. Mira smiled. She pulled the blanket up to his chin. Sleep, big brother, she whispered. We have a lot of work to do in the morning. The storm raged on for one more hour, then broke. The sun began to creep over the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The long night was over. And when the sun finally hit the valley floor, it wouldn't find a graveyard. It would find a town waking up, warm and ashamed, looking up at the hill where two orphans had held the line against the dark. The silence that followed the white death was louder than the storm itself. When Wren pushed the heavy steel hatch open the next morning, the world had been scrubbed clean. The sky was a piercing crystalline blue, innocent and bright, as if it hadn't spent the last 12 hours trying to kill them. The air was still biting, but the wind had died, leaving behind a landscape buried under 4 feet of diamond dust snow. Wren and Mira climbed out, shielding their eyes against the glare. The column of steam from the exhaust tower was still rising, a white pillar connecting the earth to the sky, a flag of survival planted on the summit. They looked down at the valley. It was a tale of 2 cities. To the west, the summit was a ruin. The storm had shattered the panoramic glass walls of the penthouse. Expensive drapes flapped uselessly in the breeze like surrender flags. The generator shed was a block of ice. It stood dark, cold, and lifeless, a hollow monument to Silas Vane's arrogant belief that money could bribe nature. But to the east, in the village, Wren let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Chimneys were smoking, not just 1 or 2, but hundreds. The roofs were heavy with snow, but the windows were clear, glowing with the reflection of the morning sun. The heat from the underground pipes, the dragon's breath, had done its work. The town wasn't a graveyard. It was alive. Look, Mira whispered, pointing to the base of the hill. A line of black dots was moving through the snowdrifts, struggling up the ridge. It was the townspeople. They didn't come with pitchforks this time. They came with snowshoes and shovels. Leading them was Sheriff Miller, and behind him, a huddle of shamed neighbors. The baker, who had locked his door, the innkeeper who had turned off his lights. When they reached the burnt oak, they stopped. They saw the 2 orphans, faces smeared with grease and soot, standing next to the hissing steam vent. They saw the open hatch revealing the warm, beating heart of the mountain. Sheriff Miller took off his hat, crushing the brim in his hands. He looked at the steam, then down at the village, and finally at Wren. The radiators, Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. About midnight, the pipes started singing. My house went from freezing to 70 degrees in an hour. We thought it was a miracle. It wasn't a miracle, Sheriff, Wren said, his voice calm, possessing a new, stoic authority. It was engineering. My father plumbed this town 30 years ago. He knew this day would come. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Guilt is a heavy coat to wear. Where is Vane? Mira asked, her eyes sharp. National Guard just airlifted him out, a woman in the back spoke up. Hypothermia, and half his guests are suing him for negligence. He's finished in this town. The bank is already foreclosing on the summit. The irony hung in the cold air. The man in the glass castle had frozen, while the kids in the hole had saved the valley. Wren looked at the people who had abandoned them. He could have been angry. He could have turned the valve off right then and there. But he felt the warmth rising from the hatch. His father's warmth. This bunker, Wren said, gesturing to the hatch. It's not a hideout anymore. It's the municipal utility station. and we're the operators. The sheriff nodded slowly, a respectful smile forming. I think that sounds about right, son. I think the town council would agree to a very generous salary and a deed to this land. Ren put his arm around Mira. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the guardians of the fire. In a world of cold indifference, they had chosen to be the warmth. What do you think? If you were Ren, would you have turned that valve to save the people who closed their doors on you? Or would you have let the frost take them? This story reminds us that sometimes the things we think are trash, old pipes, old values, and forgotten people, are the only things that hold us together when the storm hits. Silas Vane built for the view. Ren's father built for the storm.